Welcome to another episode of TechUnhinged. Today we have Paul Bockelman as our esteemed guest. As a quick intro, he spent almost 25 years building cloud platforms for defense agencies, federal government, and various intelligence communities. He spent 9 years at AWS and 3 years at Google, public sector, architecting systems that could, compromise national security in the event of security failures. He's now CTO at Qanapi, building decentralized key management for post-quantum security. It's really great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Ashar. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Would you like to tell me the joke that you have on your company name? Like we were
Oh,
talking about. It was really good.
yeah, we it's spelled Qanapi. That's the correct spelling for our name. So Quantum API. But the U was dropped for a number of various reasons, but we just joke about it and say that the U is encrypted. That's why you don't see it.
So we built encryption right in the name, right? So
right into the name.
Right
we just hit you right from the start. That's right.
Absolutely. That's good. All right. So my first question, right? So, and I ask this a lot of security people actually, because so after 25 years protecting other people's data, how paranoid have you become about yours?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting. It's surprising. I'm pretty unfazed by it. I know that's probably what most people don't expect because, pick a data breach. I'm sure my data is out there. Right. I'm sure probably a high likelihood that yours and many of our listeners are also included in those breaches. So, I think that my approach that I take really is I focus on what I can lock down. So if the data is out there, what is a way that data can be weaponized against me? So stolen identity and things like that. So number one, first and foremost by a mile is credit bureaus. I have every single one of my credit bureaus locked or frozen. And I also have services on tops of those locks and frozen options just because I'm like, I want to really, really, really control that data. And so I figure, I'm looking at this, and this is actually kind of largely, it underpins my thinking about security in general, is like control what you can control and be very vigilant about how you're controlling that data and data control point and be disciplined around that. And then the rest will sort of take care of itself. And then I'd say the second thing really is, it's pretty straightforward, but it's use multi-factor authentication for everything.
Yeah.
Just turn it on. It's not like it's going to cost you money, whether it's banking apps, travel apps, it doesn't matter. Your library card. If it's an option to put MFA on, I turn it on. And, I know some people are like, it's kind of a pain. I got to deal with this. Listen, it's much more of a pain to have a stolen identity than it is to deal with multi-factor. Frankly, and my family would probably not be happy for me saying this, but frankly, if I could put an MFA on our TV remote, I would. But, I don't want myself to sound like I'm being dismissive about security and the sensitivity of it. Obviously, that's super important. But, with all of the leaks and everything, it's like that's water over the dam. You can't reverse that. So what are you going to do going forward? And that's really the way I try to focus my time.
And applying MFA has become so easy. Even if you're not comfortable using a number, you have authenticator app, set up one of them, maybe Google, Microsoft, any on your phone, and just start setting that up. So you have everything at one single place.
Right.
You know what to do, what not to do when you have to do it. Even if you're traveling, it's very easy. You're at a place where you can't receive a text message or something, that usually becomes a pain. And I know about that pain because
and then we got my 79-year-old mother to do it. So
correct. Yeah. So after that pain, I was like, authenticator app, the way to go, right? So if you travel abroad, your number isn't working, and all of a sudden you find out you find yourself locked out of Gmail or anything, and you're like, okay.
And I'll admit, the first time you have to do it, it seems like, oh man, this is kind of a pain. And then as you keep doing it and using it over and over and over again, particularly if you're doing online banking and stuff, it becomes muscle memory. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, why wasn't I prompted for my MFA? Am I on a legitimate website or something like that? So I think it's just a really low cost, high value way to protect data that frankly, most people don't take advantage of unless it's literally thrust upon them by whoever they're doing business with.
I definitely agree. You've worked a lot with different defense and intelligence kind of departments at AWS and Google. What's the biggest difference that you've seen in terms of how they approach security compared to everyone else?
Well, what's interesting is that on a purely security architectural design best practices, they're very similar. right? Good security practices should be universal. The way that you defend your enterprise should be the same way that you're defending, a local forward operating base, right? Now, what's different is where things diverge and things become hard is that within defense, they have what's called an ATO, so it's an authority to operate. And it's a number of requirements that, I think the intentions are well placed, but what it requires is a substantial amount of additional controls, additional software capabilities, reporting that has to be added into your production system so that the government can both, continuously monitor the health of your environment and also, seek out, and try to mitigate the risk of any, wild vulnerabilities that are in the wild. The problem with that is it's really expensive, right? So in the industry, they'll refer to it kind of as like the cybersecurity valley of death, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm going to go do business with DoD. Okay, they've got all this money, they're desperate for tech, but then you hit the regulatory friction. It's like, you're kind of running along the way, and then you step onto a giant floor just covered in Gorilla Tape. It's like, oh, you immediately stop because you're like, wow, I have to navigate this. And so what ends up happening is, that friction stalls a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, because like I said, it's expensive. I mean, we're talking 18 to 24 months and several millions of dollars just to get through all of the wickets to say that you meet the requirements. That doesn't even guarantee you that you'll get $1 of business. You have to make all of that upfront investment.
Okay.
And so, when you think about the number of controls, again, for very good reasons, the control framework is very tense. It's very deliberate. But, if you're talking about what's called an impact level 4, impact level 5 system or a national security system, you're talking between 419 and 590 security controls that must be met. Security and compliance controls, they have to be met. Thinking here, okay, so your big banks and financial companies, they have very stringent security, but there are things that this requirement from the government in the way that you do architectural designs that in many cases, and I noticed this right away when I joined the ranks of the cloud, was that it seems counterintuitive to do a lot of them. When you get into network egress and ingress patterns and the way that data flows, from an enterprise perspective, they think, oh, an enterprise architect's like, oh, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna attach a gateway to my VPC, and I'm gonna put, a certain amount of scanning, L7 scanning. I'm gonna do some firewall scanning on the inside. Okay, that's straightforward. Yeah, it's not that straightforward. Literally, the structural patterns of the way the software is deployed into these environments is substantially different. But the end, like I opened up with my answer, it's like the end state is still secure. You're going to be secure and you're going to use security best practices. The difference is there's a lot more of trust, verify, and prove it on an ongoing basis that you have to plan for if you're a company that's going to start doing business in this space. And it's not, like I said, it's not inexpensive and it's not for the faint at heart. I guess the last thing I'll close with is that you as a business, if you make the commitment to go down that path, you need to realize from a sales perspective that you may not bring in your first dollar of revenue before 24 months of starting the process. So that can be a tough pill to swallow for many investors and board members because they're like, hey, we want to see the revenue engine. It's like, yeah, so do I. But, there's all these things we have to get through. So, what that did is that, essentially kind of stacked the deck where the big primes who have made those multi-billion-dollar investments over decades, they're the default ones that the government, falls back to because it's like, well, they're already, most of the way down the road. But where that fails us is that innovation will lag as a result. You have some of the smartest and best tech out there coming from entrepreneurs that never had on their roadmap that they were going to have to spend, 24 months just doing security reviews before their software could be used. And frankly, at the pace of change in the industry right now, 24 months, heck, 8 weeks, you can see that your technology could become outdated and needs to be revised with as fast as things are moving now. And it's just a really difficult pill for a lot of companies to swallow. So frankly, there's a lot of good tech that doesn't see,
Imagine you starting a company at, start of 24 or end of 24 and the 24 months now include Claude and ChatGPT and Perplexity and all of these frontier models coming out with consumer-based apps, and it just goes on spreadsheets, right? So
when you think about it, once you get through the process, your tech could be literally outdated by a year or more, and the material changes that you need to make in order for your software to be relevant, it could kick off the process needing to be redone again. So thankfully, the current administration is leaning forward in terms of the Department of War around, no, we want to embrace change. We want to embrace our small, agile technology companies because they're going to bring us the best tech in the shortest period of time. And, we're working with them as well to say, okay, let's put the appropriate guardrails in place that, the speed of adoption does not have to mean increased risk. It could be an acceptable amount of risk that goes up, but it doesn't mean to be a translation into, this could be fatal or whatever. So there's a lot happening in that space right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think being aware of all of this, you still left Google to build Qanapi's key management platform, right? So what problem were you kind of running into that made you think that, hey, we need to go and build this myself? Or, something else drove that?
So, I felt that I needed to build it because, for the record, I did thoroughly enjoy my time at AWS and Google. I consider myself to be very fortunate to have been a part of that industry as it was coming up and it was being built. And I, like many of my former colleagues, can sit there and honestly say with a straight face that we built the cloud. Like, the cloud is what it is today because of our direct actions, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Awesome.
And so I'm very proud of that fact. But why did I leave? Because when I looked at the industry, the cracks really started showing up on a daily basis in the system. When we started, everybody was scrappy. Everybody was a builder. Everyone was an owner of the business. You did what you had to do to get something done. In fact, I used to laugh because, one of the common phrases when I was at AWS is, if you discover a problem, you own it until you find a new owner. So it didn't matter if it was a service team process or something, unless you found somebody to take it over, it was your problem to deal with. But what happened is that the companies have grown and developed, and they've gotten to a point where they've hit a critical mass, and they've shifted from, and I think we've seen a very deliberate shift by these hyperscalers to be from innovative focus to more sustainment. They have these massive global architecture or infrastructures rather that are built up, and it's all about how do we sustain the revenue flow with material gains year after year. And it's less about building and more about keeping the lights on. And that critical mass, I mean, I think it's become pretty clear and evident because you see all of the layoffs that have been happening in the industry. So you've gone from, being an individual contributor, owning a problem from its inception to its resolution. And now, it's, hey, you're in the service team that we don't really need your services anymore for because we can just keep the lights on using AI or whatever. And, it's a very unfortunate thing. So as I saw that happening, I was like, you know what? I came from being a builder. I want to get back to being a builder. I felt like I was a builder, definitely at AWS, less so at Google, but I was still a builder in a sense. Because by the time I went to Google, the shift in the industry had already started. And so, there's a lot of things that we could be doing that we're not. And, how can I affect change? And then, looking at the layoffs, I see some of my friends and former colleagues with 15 years at AWS. That's a purple badge, getting laid off with it by email, mass email, literally 15 years gone. One email. So what it told me was that loyalty was too expensive for these companies when they're in a sustainment mode. And so I saw that as a big problem. The second thing was that there was real innovation that the cloud providers were kind of walking past, specifically when it comes to things like tactical edge, how do you operate and deliver a capability to a customer? I'll just call them customers that are in an environment that has a degraded connectivity, likely to be disrupted, intermittently available. How do you solve for that? Now, if you think about the cloud companies, their entire business built on global infrastructure fabric that you can run, but you need the internet connection. So how do you solve for that? What ends up happening is that it was ignored for a lot of years until folks like the Department of Defense put out contracts for $10 billion or more. They're saying, hey, we got to have this capability. But in order to win the contract for cloud computing, you need to also provide us a capability that addresses disconnected edge. And what I saw time and time again, I saw it at AWS, I saw it again at Google, and they're continuing to do it at both places, is they're going out and they're repackaging the same old hardware from the same vendors that are currently in the environment now. They're slapping cloud-like, it's not even full cloud-like software onto those hardwares, and they're calling calling that disconnected cloud.
Yep.
Well, that's anything but. And it just became a repeated pattern. I was like, oh my goodness, this is making me crazy. And then finally it was like, when you look at like some really disruptive technology innovations, you bring them to the table in one of the big providers, is that, first thing you're going to be asked is, what's the burn rate? How's it going to spin the meter, right? What's the monthly recurring revenue? And
Right.
if that disruptive technology does not generate revenue, and it needs to generate revenue pretty quickly, it'll just die on the whiteboard. It'll never see the light of day. And it doesn't matter that that is a capability that, in example of our warfighters, that they need. It's not like, hey, I would like to have this. It's no. They need a capability because the adversaries are adopting technology and tech innovation at a rate much faster than we are, because they don't have 590 security controls that they have to meet in order to build the tech. When their military wants a technology, they just go take it. And so, there's some real innovators in those markets that their technology immediately gets into the hands of our nation's adversaries, that we're looking at, well, let's make sure we go through this compliance checklist and all this and that. And meantime, you've got some bad actors out there that are doing bad things on some of the best tech infrastructure in the world, because they don't have the handcuffs. And so I looked at that and said, all right, what can I do, knowing that that is the landscape that we're operating in as a nation and as an industry for that matter? What can I do to go out and create a capability that is easy for everyone to consume, but has high impact, and do it in a way that it doesn't take 24 months to get adopted, which sounds like, you're just, it's a pipe dream. Well, what I did learn during all of my time in cloud is how to navigate the wickets, both from a compliance perspective and in government and relationships. And the other thing that I learned firsthand was that if there is a revolutionary idea that the warfighter decides that they need, they will get it, and they will get it on a timeline that's much accelerated. And so I said, all right, I know they need this stuff. I want to build. I'm not currently in an environment where building this is going to meet all of the questions and requirements that they have. I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go out back to the startup community. And that's why I joined Qanapi. That was a long answer, but it's kind of a history that kind of has to come with it.
No, I think it shows your thought process. It shows the reason why you wanted to do it. So that's absolutely gold. I mean, thinking through it and evaluating from every perspective that, hey, this is why Qanapi is important. This is the reason I wanted to come back. I felt that you have a passion for building as well. So that kind of reflected into the
Yeah.
decision-making process too, besides the actual need being out there.
Yeah.
So that's good. And how is it going so far?
Oh, fantastic. We are at breakneck speed right now. Some of the innovations that I wanted to bring forth, very talented engineering team that has the same mentality that I think I brought to the table, and that is mission focus. Let's get it done, do what we got to do. And, what's remarkable is that we have delivered on timelines that are incredible, and that's without the use of AI.
That's without the use of AI.
That's without the US. We will slowly begin to adopt AI into certain parts of what we're doing, but it's not going to be done without guardrails and the appropriate levels of inspection and things like that being put in place. But looking at how it's going, a very talented team. To go from, they call me the mad scientist. That's my nickname. And it's like, so I go from in the lab, cooking up something crazy as a mad scientist, and I've gotten it to a point where I then hand over a specification and requirements document that I then say, here it is. And oh, by the way, I started building some of the code around it. And then they're like, whoa, they take it and then they go through a sprint. And so I'm measuring innovation here at Qanapi in days, not in weeks.
That's great. That's great.
I said, and the market's responding nicely to it.
Yeah, that's good.
Refreshing.
And I think once you start incorporating AI to a certain extent where it assists in some level of mundane task and get those throughout, you will see and notice a significant jump as well, hopefully.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
There's one thing that Andy Jassy, who's was when he was CEO at AWS before he got promoted to Amazon proper. One thing that he used to always say that resonated with me, and to this day I still repeat it, is that the goal of cloud was to remove the undifferentiated heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And so cloud is there now, but I see AI, like early adoption should be, in my opinion, and I'm sure we'll probably address this in depth a little bit later, but AI can be fantastic at getting rid of undifferentiated heavy lifting tasks, and I think that's a fantastic use of it. definitely to start, especially when you're new to it, right?
Okay. So why not jump into AI? I mean, since we are
Sure.
at it already. So everyone's moving to the cloud, right? So that's there. It's kind of an obvious thing now. It's very rare that you see applications still being on-prem or it's locally hosted clouds or whatever. But
Right.
and adding AI into everything that they're doing, I've seen people giving access to their entire laptops, to their Gmail, to their they don't even know what they're giving access to or what it's asking access
Yeah.
for. And things are, going in that way. And I wasn't a very heavy GPT user back, a year back or so. But in the last 6 months, I've adopted Claude pretty much
Mhm.
into everything in my process. And there's another topic that it kind of is taking away cognitive thinking from me. So that's another problem that this thing has. But from a security perspective, what do you think people are getting wrong about how, from a security perspective, right? So how does this kind of increases probability of getting attacked more and leaving more vulnerabilities out there? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not bold enough to say that people are getting it quote unquote wrong yet, at least, because they're adopting capabilities where the power of it is still truly unknown and it's
Yeah.
not definitively controlled. And so, the urgency for deploying AI right now, it's usually driven by top down, corporate mandates. That in and of itself is a security vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, I'll use it. No, you need to use it. We're going to replace your job if in whatever. Okay, so all
Yeah.
the reasons for that, that's a separate discussion. I agree with you. But so then you get into a situation where the pressure to ship new code beats out the discipline of governing, right? And I know I kind of went on a bit of got on a soapbox earlier about the regulations and dealing with the government. And again, I'm not saying those things are bad, but I think you take it with a grain of salt and deliver. Well, AI right now, the way people are adopting it is just, oh, there are rules. It's almost like they're surprised when they say, hey, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do that. And so from a risk perspective, it's the data spillage into the LLMs, especially into the public LLMs, because once your data lands inside of somebody's model, it's out there for good. You're not going to be able to pull it back. You can't unlearn it. You can't unring that bell, so to speak. And so there's the guardrails that need to be put in place before people start putting that stuff in. Right. It's the old parental warning, don't run with scissors. I
Yeah.
look at that and I think all of that all the time. So the corporate version, take the scissors out of people's hands before
Yeah.
you let them sprint down the hall, not after. And I think that's what's happening is everybody's getting brand new sets of scissors and they're saying, go. I'm like, whoa. Let's think about this for a second. And so if you go back to like when we kicked off the conversation about, how do I worry about data or data security, and I was like, well, if you control the data, then you can control the outcome. And I really think that's where AI right now is missing the mark, in that people are adopting it, but they're not taking the necessary steps to protect the data at the data layer itself, right? And then spillages are becoming more and more common. And AI has taken the liberty of authorizing itself to do certain things that it wasn't necessarily given explicit permission to do so. I mean, so if you think in the example last summer, there's an AI coding agent that completely deleted a production database. Yeah, the AI agent did exactly what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to learn and optimize. Well, guess what? You
You don't
gave
have the
that agent
database, so yeah.
the kingdom and said, learn and optimize. And it said, well, I don't think we need this database. So it was only a matter of time. And it's a very unfortunate thing, but it's like, I'm a big fan of AI. I think it's pretty cool stuff. But it's like, man, if you don't get your house in
Harness
order,
it or you don't put guardrails around, it's gonna cause trouble.
yeah, it's like take the scissors out of your hand. So somebody's really going to get hurt badly.
So I don't know if you've seen Silicon Valley, the TV show.
Yeah, the series, yeah.
Do you remember Anton? I forgot the guy who created it, but he created this AI machine called Anton, and they
Okay.
actually did predict. There are two things that Anton did. One, it did delete their database. So 15 years back, they predicted that. And the other part that it did, that it asked the guy who made Anton asked him to optimize their lunch or something. So what
Oh
it
yeah,
ended up doing was ordering this huge amount of beef just to save money, right? So it's
yeah.
optimized. So those kind of things that they showed in the TV shows, you can now read stories around it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's scary, Yeah, I really think that there's opportunities there that,
Correct.
unfortunately, I think some people are going to be burnt in a big way before the industry really pivots and pumps the brakes like it should.
There are two things that, I mean, one is obviously data leakage, people giving access and giving open control and everything. At the other
Mhm.
side, it is also powering people to launch more sophisticated attacks, right? So because it's being used as a weapon as well. So it's a vulnerability at
Mhm.
one side where it's exposing a lot of data, and then it's also a weapon on the other side where it's allowing hackers to deploy, ingenuine new techniques, being able to generate, I mean, code massively generate code for attacks and whatnot. So it's attacking from both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost a false choice too, because there's really not two separate problems there. They're two sides of the same coin. Because AI, it gets weaponized because AI introduces vulnerabilities by using it, right?
Right.
And those new vulnerabilities are exactly what the adversaries are seeking to exploit, right?
Right.
And then it just continues to compound. From a security perspective, and if you listen to like the likes of Google with their recent security acquisitions and everything, they're using AI to combat those things. So you see a pattern where, yeah, you have this kind of this I don't want to say almost unfettered access to AI across these companies where people are using it for code and all that kind of stuff, and it's creating all these vulnerabilities. But then you have the industry using, from a defensive perspective, AI to thwart those and fight those attacks. So what you end up getting into is, I think it's a situation where you're going to see less and less of easy attack surface vulnerabilities because everything will learn and it'll tighten up and tighten up. But then what you'll see is very targeted, deep, far-reaching attacks that are meant to go really far into the target. And so, I guess if I had to make a choice, I would say that the bigger immediate risk is AI as being a vulnerability. Yeah, I mean, people are, like you said, they're bleeding sensitive information into the public models. Nobody's really actively, I mean, there's some small factions within different organizations that are saying, no, hold on, we can't, give people access to this data. But employees are pasting source code into chat windows. Agentic systems are calling AI endpoints that they weren't authorized to touch, you know what I mean? And so you have data that's just sprawling everywhere. And frankly, it's the data that is, that's the honeypot for the bad guys, right? It's
Yeah.
like, get
Yeah.
access to the data. Well, they don't even have to work. You're just literally bringing it out to them in a basket saying, here's the data.
Yeah.
And so, so from the weaponization, it's a force multiplier on attacks, but then they're also able to, kind of counteract some of those. It is the AI is, as a vulnerability, is a new security risk in the industry, and that, 5 years ago, I don't think they were thinking about that. And, a lot of people are still trying to figure out how to address it. But, it comes back to architectural discipline. And, I mean, my background has always been that as a builder and as an architect, and less of a security purist. Been around, well, let's just put together good practices. And so, where I'm at with Qanapi and my operating principles, if you would, all along has been just protect the data at the data layer. So make sure every element, whether it's at the file level, blob level, cell level, whatever it is, if you can control that data from an encryption perspective, and then you have the ability to manage keys in a way that enforces authorization, identity, and attribute control, it doesn't really, it matters, but it's less damning and less damaging if that data were to be leaked, because now the adversary has to figure out how they actually use it.
Yep.
And so in many cases it might just get discarded before it ever gets used because they're like, it's not worth the effort. I'm going to go for the low hanging fruit.
Yep. And data is the most critical. So if you're able to protect that, then you're like 90% safe.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
for sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. And talking about your architectural and what you were just saying, I was kind of going through your LinkedIn, and I saw that you wrote that regulatory complexity is an architectural problem, and architectural problems have engineering solutions. I mean, I would
yeah.
love to kind of understand if you can give me an example of what it really looks like when someone is trying to solve a compliance mandate with the
Sure.
wrong architecture or with the right architecture.
Yeah, so what we have is a situation, and I'm making myself in trouble for saying this, but over the years, there still are a lot of rules in place and I'm not going to just pick on Department of War, I'll pick on all of the government in general. And that is, there are still a lot of regulations and rules for compliance that are based, frankly, on 1990s and 2000s technology, right? They don't take into account the robust nature of cloud-based technologies or, the use of AI and other things like that. And so the threat vector it changes like super fast, number one. Number two, it's able to morph and turn itself into other things. Okay. So going back to your question, you're looking at it and say, like, what are some of the things architecturally that people do all the time that, they will look at a problem. And in the example that I'm saying here is you're saying, oh, I have this system. I need to get an ATO because we need to monetize it or we have some type of deadline. I have to meet this data control. Okay. Well, how has it been done in the past? Well, all these major suppliers that all have ATOs, they used XYZ technology to do that. Okay. So they go and they make the decision to go and buy the same technology and implement it the same way just so they could check the box. Rather than, I look at that and it just makes my head want to explode because I'm like, hold on a second here. You made a decision to meet your compliance requirements in a way that theoretically just created new technical debt for you. We're not even talking years down the road. It could be months down the road. And so now you're going to have to deal with that. And that technical debt oftentimes leads to security vulnerabilities, right? So, people make the mistake in always thinking that, oh, well, I passed a compliance audit, so I'm secure. No, compliance does not equal security. Compliance means you're able to follow directions and you've been able to document it. Security is actively defending, right? And preventing bad actors from doing things that they're not allowed to do. And so big failure that I see in a lot of these architecture design patterns is people are designing for checking the box and not designing for what is the intention of this regulation or rule. They were written a long time ago. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or that they're no longer necessary. So you have to actually kind of go back and look at it and you say, like, data at rest. Right? All data at rest needs to be encrypted. Okay. So we go and encrypt my hard drive. Check. Box is checked. Good. Yeah, but what happens when it leaves that hard drive, right? So if you think about the spirit of the regulation and rule, even though it may have been created 15 years ago or 20 years ago, you step back and say, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And so that's where I look at it from an architectural perspective. I'll say, sure, I could go buy this data encryption software or this firewall that does X, Y, Z, but how do I protect the data when it leaves the network, either legitimately or illegitimately? Right, through exfiltration. How am I protecting that data? Making sure that I have the right firewall in place and that can check a box isn't going to solve for that. And so, I'm working really hard to, with every customer and partner that we work with to really kind of instill the practice of, take the extra couple of cycles now in the early stages to set up your foundation properly so that when because you, as an architect, you have to be looking 3-4 steps down the road. You have to be looking around the corners. Customers are trying to solve a today problem. Meeting those compliance requirements often checks the box for a today problem, but it leaves things wide open for the things around the corner that the customer's not thinking about. And so there needs to be a shift in the way that we think in the industry around implementing compliance, technical architectures and patterns, and actually creating technical architectures and patterns and implementing them that meet the spirit of what the intended regulation has been intending. And the final thing I'll say about that is that takes some intestinal fortitude, because I'll be honest, the system has a visceral reaction by default. They're like, wait a minute, you didn't go buy this hardware firewall, put it in place, check the box. No, I did it this way because I believe that, by doing A, B, and C, we're going to be this much more secure. And, oh, by the way, we meet your requirements. And so you have to have the fortitude to fight that system and that visceral reaction that you have to know is going to come. In the end, what I have experienced in cloud, and this was the very early days, they were like, oh no, we're not going to cloud. And now look at, the government's adoption of cloud. If you stick to your principles and reasons for why your sound architectural practice is the right thing to do, everybody gets better off in the end, because then it becomes a standard that gets adopted across the board.
So think in the spirit of the compliance, not just think about the checkbox, make sure. So, that's the proper way to do it. All right. So everyone kind of keeps hearing about post-quantum cryptography. For somebody who doesn't really live in security, what does that actually mean, and why should somebody really care about it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, post quantum is, it's one of those, dare I say, one of those sexy problems out there in the industry. It gets a lot of buzz. It's the buzzword du jour, I guess, but it's a very real problem. Right.
Right.
So for people who are not really paying attention to it, what it really means is that as, post quantum computers become more and more prevalent, that they will be able to solve for and decrypt and break encryption algorithms that currently would take thousands of years with current computing technology. They could actually do it in hours with one of those computers. And so that's a very real problem. The
Yep.
thing is it doesn't really resonate with a lot of people, right?
Right.
They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that stinks, and so somebody's going to be able to hack my password for banking. No, 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 that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, every aspect of your digital interaction in life is protected by these mathematical encryption algorithms. Your bank account, your medical records, your travel records, air traffic control, software updates in your cars, all of those things. And right now, it's essentially unbreakable. But the math problem that they have to solve, takes a very long time. But the new quantum computers are able to do that at sufficient scale in hours, not centuries. And so the problem is one in which people are beginning to recognize the problem and saying, well, that's, Q day is in 2030. Well, all the indications are that Q day is going to come before 2030.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's entirely believable that Q day, when that post quantum capability hits, is as early as 2027. And so, people are thinking, well, we'll solve for that problem. No, the problem is you have to solve for the problem now,
Yeah.
because once it's here, it's too late. And when you think about
Will MFA still protect us? Sorry to break your thought, but
yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so when you look at it, like a lot of the data breaches that happen right now, it's state actors are doing harvest now, decrypt later. Right? They're like, yeah, we're not going to spend our time trying to decrypt these things. We'll do it when we have quantum computers to do it. And so if you have any data that's meaningful, it's going to be current data, right? And so your current data, if it's not protected in a way, at a minimum, slows down somebody with access to quantum computing resources for breaking the encryption. I hate to say it, but you're majorly vulnerable. Everybody's majorly vulnerable. So what we have now is like, the government has been on this for a while. And it's introduced another industry buzzword term, talking about crypto agility, right?
Yeah.
So you have these different cryptographic modules, which is basically the math behind what creates the encryption that people use to secure their mainframes, their banking systems, whatever. So if you come up with a new module, which you'll hear a phrase called post-quantum cryptography, which are their cryptographic modules strong enough to not be broken by quantum computer, well, it's great that they exist, but how are you using them? How are you putting them in place?
Right.
And so that's where agility comes in, because a lot of these systems are legacy systems that aren't built for
Yep.
the size and the computing requirements of a post-quantum key. And so that becomes a real problem first. Second, if you're talking, petabytes, exabytes of data that's been encrypted using an old standard, do you have to go back and touch every piece of that historical data and re-encrypt it? So these are very real problems that people are trying to address, but I don't know that it's being addressed with the vigor that it really deserves. And so I think the first thing that you need to do is come up with a way to, you decide on the standard and one that's going to work for you from a cryptographic
Right.
library perspective. And then you have to put together a plan to not even implement and roll it out. You need to, if you don't already have it, you need to have a very robust inventory of all of your software systems out there.
Yep.
And what cryptography they use and why. And then you need to prioritize the uplift of your critical systems, and as you go through the progression. But again, that uplift can be very difficult. And so, one of the things that we're doing at Qanapi, and there's other companies out here doing it as well, and that is making crypto agility something that can be consumed without creating just absolutely massive pain. Going back to the Andy Jassy saying, right, get rid of the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So if we can get rid of the undifferentiated heavy lifting of implementing these new modules, and also, so you get speed and you get security and you have the ability to change, those three things are going to threat actors, may not stop them completely, but it's going to slow them down.
Yep.
And so I think that's super important, and we need to really be thinking about those things.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So a lot of companies are nowadays kind of doing these, and I'm sure you've heard the term AI transformation, evolving from digital
Yeah,
transformation to AI transformations and automations. And then you have companies kind of building these post-quantum crypto and crypto agility solutions and key management. Where do you think these two worlds can eventually collide? And I know you talked about preparing them a little bit in the earlier
sure.
answer as well, but I'd love to kind of see, because these are two different, like in from the 1980s to I would say around 2000s or 2010 probably was the era of a digital transformation where you had these SAPs, Oracles, the world kind of, transforming.
Yeah.
And now you will have this next era in the next 20, 30 years where it's AI transformation, right? Agents and human in the loop and all of those concepts.
Throw a question back to you. Is like, do you really think it's the next 20, 30 years that transformation should occur? I think it's less than 10.
Yeah, and that's a so the what I feel is that organizations are usually slow to move, right? So they have a lot of inertia, and their adoption to technology is typically because it's a lot of people management change as well. So I mean, we've been working with orgs, we've been working with enterprises as well as kind of SMB space as well, mid market, and what we've seen is not really that how much the technology can come in. It's really about how quickly the people are able to adopt it as well.
Yes.
And there's a certain resistance or a certain, I don't want to say resistance, but certain, you have to bring in that change within the people. And that change will take time. Even, I mean, I'm at the forefront of all of these things, and yet I
Yeah.
have to unlearn a lot of things the way I used to do them to be able to adopt AI. And we're finding it tough to even
Yeah.
implement it across our workflows right now. I mean, maybe in the next year, year and a half, or maybe in the next, 10 months or so, we'll be there. But we are right at the forefront. So imagine now businesses that, their technology is not their primary source of business or revenue. They do
Mhm.
some sort of business and they have to adopt it. So I feel there's maybe not 2030, but maybe 10, 15 years or
Yeah.
something those lines. Half of
So
what it took for digital transformation to, get an impact.
yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, so when you think about the AI transformation and post quantum like colliding, I think that those two worlds have already started to collide. I think it's happening right now.
Thing.
Just most organizations don't realize that they're in that collision course. They're like, okay. And so, from a convergence perspective, I look at it and say, AI in all of its glory, and again, I'm a fan of AI, is generating absolutely massive new volumes of data. And it's operating off of sensitive data. So it could be corporate data, corporate training data, embedded stores, even the agent memory of the AI that they're using. That memory is data that's getting generated and indexes and things like that. And they're sitting in systems that weren't architected for the crypto agility, right? So now you used to have a lot of data. Now you've got even more data,
Yeah.
and it's just coming in just non-stop. Keeps happening. And meanwhile, the crypto post quantum migration clock is just still running. It's not slowing
Right.
down. And so that's where you see the adversaries that are doing harvest now, decrypt later, because they realize that many companies and organizations out there are not in a position to protect the data at the rate at which they've generated it. And so, and then I go back to, you have companies that are racing to deploy AI, and they're doing it on top of these cryptographic foundations that are going to become obsolete much sooner than they previously expected. And there's a discipline that's required to fix those foundations. Many companies don't take the time to fix the structural changes required. And that mismatch is something that you're not going to be able to engineer your way out of in the future, right? So, it's kind of like, building a skyscraper on a foundation that's just all sand. You
Right.
already know it's going to fail, right? And the taller that you keep building that skyscraper, the more expensive the collapse is going to become. And so, there needs to be a sequence, in my opinion. You need to protect the data first. This is, in your AI strategy, right? You need to protect the data at the data layer first. So that gets into how you are protecting the data. Like that's the method, right? And
Right.
then you look at the cryptographic foundations and the agility. So there's it's what you're encrypting with, and so your libraries and how agile are you around being able to ebb and flow with that, because adversaries are going to get more sophisticated, and they're going to come up with ways to circumvent or get around a library that somebody has rolled out. And so you got to be able to quickly change that. And then third, finally, that's when I think you start scaling your AI workloads. You have to do it on top of one of those foundations, because then guess what? Now, if your data is protected, and like you said, there's
Yep.
organizational change is the long tail in this process, and it's really difficult. And you have a workforce which is, it's being loaded up every year after graduation with students that are focused on adopting AI, and because they grew up with it, right? They grew up
Yep.
with technology in their hands, but you still have an industry that's owned and run by people who are, well, no, there's a process we have to follow.
Yeah.
And so that collision keeps happening, right? And so I think innovating and taking the time to build the structural foundation around protecting the data, you can actually meet the objectives of both of those personas, right? So you have the new people that are coming out of all the best universities that are going to create the best AI models and everything. It's like, that's great, but you're going to do it with this data that we have, amply protected. And if you need to use something that's sensitive, there's a process, and the process is, it's enforced like in the DNA of the data protection of itself.
Mhm.
It's not a human policy. It's a way to get access to the keys, which is enforcing that process. And so, you look at it right now, it's, in my opinion, I think it's still a bit of the Wild West. And so it's incumbent upon, I think, those of us that have been in the industry for a while to push back at times with some leadership and say, all right, yeah, I'm super excited about AI as well. And I think that we can do some really cool things, but we need to put a few things in place before we go down that road. I think that's going to pay dividends like hugely in the near term future that people aren't anticipating, because the debt that's going to result, as for those who have not taken those necessary steps are going to be massive, and they could be literally existential threat to their company or their organization. It could put them out of business, literally.
Right. No, that's true. And we advise companies the same thing at all the time, right? So you have to build the foundation, because otherwise with AI, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So if your data
Yep.
doesn't make sense,
It does it really quickly.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and it builds, yeah, exactly.
It does
I
it very
mean,
quickly.
people, it's a funny thing, usually happens, and people, work with AI and generate these 25-pager documents, like just like that, and
Mhm.
kind of ban them. Nobody will send me those documents because it's a pain adopting and reading through it, and a lot of time it's just not right. But they're wonderful uses as long as you learn to harness this.
Right.
So that's
Right.
where the line is, right? So all right, so closing statement or closing question. 25 years, Paul, you've been doing this.
Yep.
What gets you out of the bed in the morning? And if somebody is thinking about getting into security or infrastructures, what would you tell them?
What gets me out of bed in the morning really is conviction that, my work actually matters. So, if I've helped to build something that saves a life, prevents a cataclysmic societal failure, or even, just makes it easier for my 79-year-old mother to, schedule a doctor's appointment, it's worth it, right? Because those little things in life are the things that matter. And the reason why, and I know that sounds like a rosy answer and everything, but I actually live and breathe it, because I've personally come close to death. I've skirted death, and I've been
Wow. Okay.
literally, I shouldn't be here. That's a different story for a different day. But I will tell you that one thing that it did for me is that, once you've experienced that, everything fundamentally shifts in your way you think. First and foremost, stop waiting. You stop saying, well, I'm going to wait. We're going to get here at some point. You stop hedging for time, you stop hedging against risk, and you decide to live now and attack the challenges aggressively and not give up until you've solved for them, right? I guess, and I get myself in trouble with the misses when I say this, but, I think inherently it's because you understand that in your bones that you're on a shorter runway than everyone else, and the time is shorter than you think. And so from a technology perspective, so anybody who's thinking about getting into security or infrastructure work, tell them is that, this is one of the few fields out there where what you build genuinely matters in the context of people's lives. Everyone's. It's not about, and don't get me wrong, these people are super important too, but it's not about optimizing click ads, clicks on ads or anything like that, or chasing, web engagement metrics. Super important for financial status of a company. I get it. Working on and protecting the systems keeps society standing it's a pretty fulfilling line of work. Your banks, your hospitals, your power grids. I mean, oh my goodness, the power grids, the war fighters. The data is required to make all that work. But I would also tell them that it's hard, man. Sometimes it's unglamorous work, and it's the stuff that rarely makes it onto the cover of a magazine. But people who do it, they know, that they're the unsung heroes here in a sense. And it's not trying to build a hero syndrome, but if you've got the temperament for solving for hard problems and patience to see it through, this is a good and lucrative industry. And I'm not saying lucrative necessarily from a compensation perspective, even though that is a real thing. There's really a rare and underrated satisfaction that comes from doing this, knowing that your work actually meant something. The next 25 years is going to be even more important than the first. And so I
I
try
think
to.
the overall scope increased a lot in terms of work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will add to this is that kind of what another thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is that I feel a very strong drive to mentor and bring up the next generation. And, there were people that helped me along the way in my career, and that I want to pay it forward. And so with this outlook on life that I have, it's like I'm not going to wait until I'm getting ready to retire out of the industry before I try to develop the next generation. No, what I want to do is I want to bring that generation up now and put them in a position to where maybe they replace me in my current role while I'm still in the workplace, right? And to me, that is a success. That's not a failure. And so, those are the kind of things that drive me to get out of bed in the morning, go to work.
That's good to hear. All right, Paul, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on Tech Unhinged.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.